So, Schmitty, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right, boss, man. It really is good being able to see you. And honestly, I've been proud of everything you've been doing with this. It's an honor to be on this podcast with you. And there's
Oh,
no lie
stop.
and no joke.
Well, now that I know what you sound like when you're lying, so
Nah, man. I've been working you up this entire time, man. I'm serious. It's really cool to be able to see the different questions that you've been able to ask and finding awesome people to answer. And for some reason, I'm here too. But it's a really cool thing
yeah, I find you as
what
an
you've been
awesome
doing with
person
this.
that wants to talk about mental health. It's hard to find people in the Christian realm that want to talk about mental health and that have good answers on it. That's the second part of it.
Well, I'm one of those things, I hope. If I'm lucky, I'm both, but we'll see. I did all as much homework as I possibly could. And it's interesting that the way that this all started too, because when you and I were texting, just catching up a little bit,
Hmm.
I just finished a series for a young adult ministry here in my hometown in Dothan. The young adult pastor was out that week, and he was like, "Hey, would you mind starting this series up for me?" And I said, "Sure." So I read Chris Hodges' Out of the Cave, which is about mental health as well. And then from there, I just went down a mental health rabbit hole and just got all this information. And now I get to be able to talk about it over here with you, since we were talking about it just roughly around the same time. So again, it's an honor.
So let's just make sure that we're kind of on the same page when it comes to mental health in the church. It seems like that church hasn't really had an answer towards mental health, or really a really good answer towards mental health. What we've seen online, at least, or at least I've seen, or what other people have communicated, why they don't like the church in this regard of mental health. A lot of times people will say, or they'll say that their pastors have said, or repeating the same message, that like if you're dealing with issues like anxiety, depression, or other issues regarding mental health, that you're just not praying hard enough, or you have some sin that you're not dealing with in your life, which possibly could be part of it. But I don't always think that's 100% of usually mental health issues. Am I getting that right, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, in fact, in 2013, there was a study, and I don't remember the source of the survey. It could have been Christianity Today, since I'm a really big fan of them. But in 2013, there was a survey, and 50% of evangelicals believed that prayer can heal mental health issues like depression and anxiety. And I do believe there's truth in that. I do believe that we serve a God that can heal any illness, physical, mental, definitely spiritual, all the three of those things. But I think you are correct that we don't treat mental health in the same way we do physical health, or at least it's a new trend for us to be able to look at it more holistically than what has been in the past. If I have a broken leg and I come in, people pray for me for that broken leg and pray for healing for that, but it doesn't stop me from going seeing like counselor or a doctor, a therapist.
Yeah.
But same thing for mental health. It seemed like there's a bigger stigma for that. But I will say this: in all the conversations that I've had with pastors in several different churches within the past 3 years, especially since COVID hit, I don't think a single pastor would want you to feel like you have to hide your mental health issues or any mental illnesses that you may be able to have, the depression, anxiety, etc. I think we are in a place where people are rediscovering what it truly means to have a holistic view of the triune man, that we're made in body, soul, spirit, those three
Hmm.
parts. And now there's an emphasis on the soul part to be able to make sure that all of that is balanced out. Sometimes we go to extremes, and that could be something that we talk about later on. But yeah, I think we are more open now than we have been in a long time.
I like when you mentioned, because I was listening to some other people talk about mental health in the church, when you talk about if someone, how we treat physical ailments versus like mental ailments. And like if someone came to you with a broken leg, you're not going to be like, you need to pray harder to get that broken leg fixed. No, you're going to be rushing them to the hospital because their leg is broken. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or getting them to a professional who can take care of the broken leg. And I feel like it should be more like that towards mental health. And I think you mentioned in a conversation that we're getting there, but we're not 100% there. So I'm hoping like this kind of conversation can help with everyday Christians have that kind of mindset towards mental health. And so,
Well, I do think, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off,
no, go ahead.
boss. I
Go
do
ahead.
think that that whole holistic triune man part is super important too, because I don't think you can separate, just like you can't separate the physical and the spiritual parts of your walk with Christ. You can't separate the mental and the spiritual either. And some of the issues that we come across is when we have a massive imbalance in one way or the other. One thing that I think of when it comes to the church is that whenever there's a new movement, like I would say the soul care movement that's happening right now in a lot of ARC churches around where the focus is on mental health, you always like hit a swing and like a pendulum, like an extreme, and then it comes back to where it needs to be. So right now, in what I am witnessing in several churches all around the U.S., is that we are now swinging towards a huge emphasis on mental health. And the important part is for us to be able to balance that with being able to look at it holistically, again, the physical health as well as the spiritual health. And I have to say this before we get too far into the whole issue and talking about depression, anxiety, and all this stuff. I do want to say this. I am not a doctor. My wife, Ariel, she's the doctor. She actually is a doctor of internal medicine. In fact, one opportunity that we have soon is that we'll be able to move to Orlando for her to become a rheumatologist. So she's not a psychiatrist, but she is an internal medicine doctor, and she deals with mental health every single day. So I get to be able to pick her brain a little bit and just be able to figure a few things out with her. But my view is that of a pastor, right? My view is that from the church and saying, what is my faith? What is my Bible? What does my God say about this? And what I hope to do in the conversations when it comes to mental health is be able to bring all of the data together and show that in the face of any issue, including depression, that we can acknowledge that it exists. We acknowledge that the Bible says things about this as well. We also can acknowledge that God has authority over it, and that there are steps that we can take in our faith and answers that are in our faith that is provided through the church and through our relationship with Jesus Christ. There's really cool connections that I would love to show sometime in the future about that too. But I wanted to say that before we got too deep into the weeds with this.
Of course, like if you don't need to be a doctor to see that someone's leg's broken, nor do you need to be a mental health expert to see like, oh, I think they may have some problems. You know what I mean? But let's just go back to just stating like the base terminology of things. So like, some people may not even know what mental health is, because I mean, relatively it is kind of a newer term, probably last 10, 15 years or so. And of course, there's people who are older than 10, 15 years ago. So how would what would be the best way to, I guess, describe mental health to someone in the church who has no idea what mental health is?
So the Bible doesn't have the words mental health, like you said. It's a new term in the same way that the word dinosaur isn't in the Bible, but the word dragon is, even though they can be equivalent, just because dragon's an older word and it's something that the Bible has used. That was more common in that time, right? But what you do see is the effects, and what you do see is what we can quantify as mental health in different stories and different sections of the Bible, all throughout the Old Testament and New Testament. When I define mental health, I do consider it your mind, will, and emotions. That's what I consider the soul in the triune man. It is really taking care of the gift that God has given you of your person and of your being. So when I mentioned soul care earlier, it's that movement that's happening in a lot of churches right now, in which people, especially pastors and those that are in ministry, they're having a tendency to burn out or become depressed or suffer from mental illnesses because they're putting themselves in environments in which their mind, will, and emotions are not being taken care of. So to make sure that you are in a place where your emotional state is proper, to make sure that you are a place where you're able to make proper decisions through your will, and to make sure that your mind is sharp and that nothing's holding it back, that's important. And of course, there are the biological sides of things too. Like sometimes there are things that are just a process, and there are things that God has given us that allows us to use it as a witness or as a testimony to others, like the biological side. If there's a chemical imbalance, that's clearly physical, that's clearly a body issue, but it affects our mental health as well. It affects our minds and the way that we reason and the way that we function. So it is, I would say it is part psychological, environmental, and also biological as well.
So when it comes to, because I mean, probably one way that a lot of people look at mental health in the church is that like, oh, it's this new age kind of stuff, this new, all these young people who are sad for no reason, kind of feeling. And so they view it as more of like a, I guess, only young people are experiencing this. But if I'm not mistaken, it's a lot more than just younger people, right, that are experiencing symptoms of or ailments of mental health, right?
Yeah. This is every generation of the church and every generation period has new definitions and new approaches to the same material. But what we would call mental health now may be something called completely different, even in the Old Testament. And we'll probably get into the Book of Lamentations eventually. But let me show you a couple of stats that have been important that I got from Chris Hodges' Out of the Cave that I want to be able to show you as well. And that's one of my reference points. I have several that I'll eventually show you guys as well. But let me go ahead and share my screen so I can show you what I have too. So this is something that I found very interesting. Calls to mental health hotlines went up 900%. Divorce filings went up 26% since COVID happened, since 2020. 25% of young adults have considered suicide per the CDC. 1 out of 9 people are on some type of depression medication. 1 out of every 5 people have been at some point on depression medication. Antidepressant use has gone up 300%. It continues to increase. And the American Journal of Psychiatry states that the worldwide survey, in that survey, 45.7% of those people that have surveyed that claim to have major depression disorder also have a lifetime of 1 or more anxiety disorders as well. So this is something that impacts a lot of people. And the 1 in 5 people that have been at some point on antidepressants, my wife actually went through a state of depression as well in 2021 because of her place as a doctor inside of the medical field and how difficult things have gotten because of COVID. And then also, I remember before COVID, 2019, I believe, my father-in-law went through something severe, and he is in his late 50s, and he started struggling with something that was happening in his business that was affecting him mentally and then physically and then spiritually. And he was also on antidepressants. So the big thing is that this is becoming more and more of an issue as we become more and more disconnected with different things that we need. And it's not just a young person problem. It is something that we're seeing that there's these disconnections have happened since the Old Testament. And yeah, I'm just going to stop there. Since the Old Testament, there's been a lot of cool things that we have been able to see because of that.
So when you're saying stuff about like in the Old Testament, because the only verse that came to mind when I first started approaching mental health was the verse in Philippians, I believe, where it's like whatever things are good, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, keep those things on your mind. I don't, because I think this whole mental health epidemic that we're approaching it's an extremely complex thing. I don't want anyone to think we're trying to simplify this at all. It's a multifaceted problem, as some people would call it. And so there's multiple reasons why we're experiencing a lot of these things. Things could be economical reasons, things could be political reasons, could be culture. I mean, it could be 100 different things. It could also be religious, like viewpoints on things that are just feeding it more so. Not saying any of those are the main problem of all of them, but one thing I've noticed, like with Philippians, is like whatever things are true, whatever things are good, so on, the rest of the verse. There's a lot of negative information thrown our way. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. So this has come up in multiple episodes regarding different things as well. So, I mean, it's kind of a common trend when it comes to the power of social media and the internet in general. The age of information is what we're in today, where there's just information thrown at us all day, constantly. Not even necessarily by choice. You know, you hop on for work and you're going to get information thrown at you all day. You hop on for relaxation onto Netflix or onto Facebook and you're going to get information thrown at you all day. And a lot of it's negative. And so a lot of it is not true. It's not noble. It's not pure. It's not lovely. it's not praiseworthy, and we're dwelling on them quite often, not necessarily by choice, but we're dwelling on them quite a bit. And so it seems like because of this negative mindset that everyone's getting thrown at, even with the news is just only doing negative media, that would be a large contributor to a lot of the negative, the mental health issues that we're seeing today. And so from a religious point of view, at least in that regard specifically, how would we address that other than just not think about negative things?
Well, so you're covering on a lot of different points that I would love to be able to cover. And I will agree with you 100%. There's not one universal cause for depression or anxiety, or low mental health.
And we do need to repeat that there is not one single cause for the reason of
Yeah.
depression and all that.
Yeah. And so what I would love to do is be able to look at it from what the Bible says and compare it to some of the studies that we have. And what I've found interesting is how similar the two are, and how the Bible just continues to be able to show up and show out in modern day issues, or what we consider modern day issues. Because if people look at the Bible and say, hey, where does it actually talk about depression? You can tell them that there's an entire book called Lamentations. There, in fact, let's start with that. This is something I've been wanting to jump to as well. Let me show you something cool with this too. So Lamentations chapter 3 verses 17 to 20. This sounds exactly what we're talking about. Peace has been stripped away. I've forgotten what prosperity is. I cry out, my splendor is gone. Everything I had hoped for from the Lord is lost. The thought of my suffering and homelessness is bitter beyond words. I will never forget this awful time as I grieve over my loss. I don't know about you. That sounds like a depressed state.
100%.
And of course, I wasn't there. I'm not Jeremiah who wrote this. I'm not the person who actually put this together, but my exegetical studies say, man, if there's a reason to write Lamentations, like this is it. This shows the despair that people are able to go through. And it's not just in the Old Testament. Paul talks about it. In fact, let me show you this. Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians, where he was at a place. He was at a place where he despaired of life itself at the end of 2 Corinthians 1:8. And then also another one of the options that I show people actually is the same one that I would say Chris Hodges shows in his book, Out of the Cave. Again, I'm referencing that book often because that was my starting point. I'm not going to stay on it for long because I have a lot of my own research that I want to show and the aggregated data that I want to show as well.
Yeah.
But the main person that Chris Hodges focuses on is Elijah from 1 Kings 18 and then 19. And Elijah is somebody who is a man of God, a prophet. He is somebody who is so important to the story that the Bible tells, to the point that even in the New Testament, when Jesus was going through something called the Transfiguration, Elijah shows up in a quote unquote holy form. Like he's shining, and Elijah and Moses are both there. And Moses is the representation of fulfillment of law through Jesus. And Elijah is a representation of fulfillment of all prophecies through Jesus, right? That's how important Elijah is to the entire story of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Well, in 1 Kings 18, he's actually doing some amazing things to the point that he mocks other gods. And he actually shows these prophets of Baal and the followers of this other god, which are in Israel, including Israel's king and the king's wife at that time, Jezebel, how amazing God is and how all the other gods don't match up because they're not even real. And it's so cool to be able to see that story. And I would recommend those people that want to go back and read 1 Kings 18 in full to see how powerful God is, but also how close to God Elijah was. And then 1 Kings 19, the next chapter, is when Jezebel writes out basically a letter and sends it over to Elijah and says, may my gods deal with me if I don't deal with you first, right? I'm going to kill you before the day is done. Just letting you know I am on my way. I don't know why you would want to send a letter just basically saying, hey, I'm coming to kill you. But for some reason, Elijah took that so personally, and so it affected him so negatively that he ran. it didn't matter all the different things he did in the name of the Lord. He ran, and he ran away. In fact, he ran into a cave at the mount of God, at the bottom of the Mount of God, or what's called the Mount of God. And it's Chris Hodges does a lot of parallels with that I don't really want to go into, but it really does show something that even in James 5:17, James 5:17 says Elijah was just human, just like us. And in that case, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, because Elijah was human, then we can pray just like he did and be able to see awesome things. But I see it in the reverse. I see it that Elijah prayed and did awesome things, but he was still human. He still struggled with the same things that we struggle with. Even though he was so close to God, he still struggled with what we would call mental health today, but really with despair and with fear and anxiety, and go into a depressive state and hide in a cave, or walk in a wilderness for 40 days, so many different things. So the Bible has a lot to say about it. It's just really keeping your eyes open to be able to know that this is the way that it was described in the Old Testament and New Testament, and the way that we can translate it into our culture today, which is something we do often.
So taking this information, which a lot of it is a little revelation for me, but taking some of this information, how does someone who wants to learn about this, like I'm assuming like a Christian who's dealing with some kind of mental issue, which, to be honest, probably most of us are. We're just denying the fact that we are. Would you say Lamentations is where you want to start, or just more so the story of Elijah?
Yeah, I would look at the story of Elijah, because some of the things that we're not covering today was even in the time in which Elijah ran away, and before he started walking the wilderness and heading into the cave, he basically found himself a little place where he just called out to God and said, "Just kill me now," right? Mm-hmm. And God sends an angel of the Lord to feed him essentially and say, "Take a nap." And I don't know about you, but sometimes in my worst times, all I need to do is be fed and then also take a really good nap, and then I'm able to reset and be able to do something as well. But I think 1 Kings 18 and 1 Kings 19 are really good starting points. And of course, if you really want to look at other things, like Job is able to show the power of God no matter what happens in our lives. It's the oldest poem, I will say, of the Bible, the oldest piece of literature that we have. So there's a lot of monologues in it, but it is an epic in and of itself. If you want to see something that would be,
to read. It's hard to go through, just like digesting all of it. Not like that it's like literally hard to read, but like just taking all that information in. It's like the story of Job is a hard one, if that makes sense.
I think something that's interesting in the book of Job, and I don't have it in my notes right now, but at one point, when Job's friends heard that Job has gone through all these things and gone through so much loss, all they did was sit beside him for 3 days. They didn't say anything. Now, when they opened their mouths, there became a problem. Mm-hmm. But before that, they were there for their friend. And Job was just able to sit there in the company of people who cared for him. And I think that's an important lesson as well. But, like I said, there's so many different places inside the New Testament and the Old Testament that we can point to be able to say these are the things that we're able to look at when it comes to our mental health and what the Bible actually says. So it's hard for me to point to one specific thing. Again, Chris Hodges uses Elijah and does a lot of parallels between that and Johann Hari's Lost Connections, which we can talk about. In fact, can I go ahead and talk about that now? Because I think there's some really good connections.
Let's go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. So Johann Hari is an investigative journalist. And one thing that he did was he went and talked to all the experts in depression and mental health, anxiety. And his goal and what he wanted to do is find what was truly causing depression and what was truly causing the issues that are increasing the mental health or decreasing mental health over time. And he found 9 different things when he just started to investigate, interview all these experts. And the 9 different things are really interesting too, because 2 of them are biological. The rest are psychological or environmental. When you have a disconnection, is what he says, then these are the causes, or these are the sources that may bring depression over time. And again, there's no universal cause, but if you look at it, a disconnection between meaningful work and yourself. It is a disconnection to other people, a disconnection to meaningful values, to childhood trauma, to status and respect, a disconnection to the natural world, which isolation is a big thing when it comes to that, especially what's happened in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Our disconnection to the natural world and just being outside has I guess it's widened over time. A disconnection to a hopeful or secure future. And then the other two are genes and just brain changes over time.
Yeah.
Those are the things that Johann was able to discover or was able to write about. What I find interesting is that our faith in our God has an answer to each and every one of these things. When it comes to meaningful work and doing the work of Jesus and finding joy in doing the work, like what Jesus says in John 4 at the end of talking to the Samaritan woman, saying you find fulfillment when you're in my harvest. To other people, that's a huge thing about being in the church and being one body of Christ. To meaningful values, which is what our faith is about. Childhood trauma, we have ministries, like I was over a ministry over here in Dothan called Freedom, and the goal was to be able to be free and release ourselves from those issues that we have had over time. The status and respect is when we understand ourselves and who we were made to be. And in that, we're able to see how great our God is too. The natural world, Sabbath is a big thing with our faith, which we don't practice enough. And just going outside is a big thing that we don't practice enough. Hopeful and secure future we can find in Christ. And our genes and our brain changes, these are the things that God has control over that no man has. And to be able to say, like, it's so cool to see these lost connections, these disconnections that the world say these are the problems. But then we look at our faith and we say we have answers. We have things that we know how to properly deal with these things. And if they become habits, if they become things that we are truly able to practice as a church, then those are the things that we're able to work in. Those are the things that we're able to move forward in so that the mental health can increase over time. In fact, I will also say this, and then I'll let go of the mic and you can just move us wherever you want to. In 2020, in December of 2020, Gallup did a mental health survey, as they do every year, and just be able to see where people said if they had excellent mental health or not. And in 2020, every single category, whether it became your I would say your political affiliation, your gender, your age, your education, your income level, every single category decreased by an average of 7 points across everything except for one category. And that was those people who attended church on a weekly basis. They actually increased 4%. When the lowest one was like a negative 1% decrease for one party. But for everything else, it was like a negative 12%. In fact, those people that only attended once a month, that stat actually decreased by 12% to the point that only 30%, like a third of the people were considered themselves mentally unhealthy or unhappy with their lives in that point. So there's a lot of connections there that I just don't feel like we highlight that are there, that are already present in the church. We just don't highlight it as a need that we can point out to the world and say, hey, we have an answer to that.
Yeah. I do want to go back to those 9 things, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Of Johann Hari's 9 categories there.
Yeah.
And so some of those struck out to me maybe on more of a personal chord. And I know my viewpoint on things is not like a individual one. I would say it's more of a common one. Or at least my observation. It may be less so the past couple weeks, because we know with some of the world events going on, there's some crazy stuff going on over in the European area. But I would say over from 2016 to like now, like hopeful and secure future has felt weird for probably people in my age range. And you can probably relate to that too as well. And also like meaningful work, because like a lot of the work that people in their 20s and lower 30s are doing feels very meaningless, because a lot of the work that we're doing nowadays in the work environment is like to look busy work. None of it is like actual work that you care about. It's like I have to look like I'm doing something for 8 hours kind of work, which is actually very detrimental to your mind. Like you know that you're lying to your boss, but like you can't like do something. Like there's nothing else to do anyway because you've already done everything. Like if you worked really hard at it, you'd be done in like 2 hours. But now you have 8 hours to make this look like you got to do. And so like you're like lying inside your own mind, which that may be just the two that I'm more personally connected to. And I don't know if I'm hitting a string with you or anything like that, but I know several people who would agree with me at least on those two. Of course, we're disregarding the world events happening like in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, which the hopeful and secure future is a very important one for many people right now. And I get it. I understand. And again, I do believe that our faith has answers to this. But I think the biggest one for me was the natural world. I am somebody just like where you're talking about, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up too. I am somebody who is glued to information, and I love the internet for all the wrong reasons. Maybe not all the wrong reasons. I love the internet because of how accessible information is, whether or not it's correct information.
Yeah.
And so something that's happened over time is that I would rather stay on my phone and be on YouTube, or stay on my phone and be on Facebook, which I don't even post on Facebook. I just want to absorb what other people are doing and then find all these little issues that other people may have or compare myself to them. Life becomes less like reality the more that I stay away from the natural world. And it's more than just getting outside. It's the connections that I have in the world as well, like my family or my church or my friends, or doing something that allows me to be able just to separate myself from all the noise that happens and just focus on what's important. That's a big deal for me. But with the meaningful work one, I do understand, because a lot of people, when they are suffering with these disconnections, they find ways to medicate. Or in my personal experience, I see that. In fact, one of the things that we talk about, one of my mentors talks about often, is when you are in a place where you are unhealthy, spiritually, physically, or mentally, you find a way to medicate to have a temporary reprieve. And the question is, what ways are we medicating? Some medications are healthy. Some ways to be able to disconnect ourselves can be healthy. Like you don't take medication. You don't take a medication with a hope to rely on the medication. There can be a reliance on those things. But then there are other medications that are just, whether it be real medications or the habits that we have trained ourselves with, the things that we put into our body, whether it be through our eyes, through our ears, in any form or fashion. Those medications are things that we can become reliant on. And then from there, it becomes more of like an idol or a God that begins defining what we do, because we keep on seeking that temporary reprieve. But let me show you something that I think is really interesting too. Well, I say let me show you, like I have a slide for this, but I don't. One thing that happened near World War II was that there was this Jewish psychiatrist from Austria. His name was Viktor Frankl, I believe. Frankl or Frankl. I read it. I never heard the name. I just read the name. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And this is something that he did. He looked at Sigmund Freud's theory and thought it was wrong, that life was not about pleasure, as in life was not about medication, that it was about meaning. And when you don't have any meaning, you dull yourself with pleasure. So after World War II, he worked with suicidal patients in Vienna. And these are people who had been in concentration camps. And he gave them three things. And he called it logotherapy. He gave them meaningful work, something to do that matters, something that was able to increase or make a positive impact in the world around them that they were able to be a part of. He gave them a community of friends who loved each other unconditionally. And he took whatever suffering that they were experiencing, and they found the positive in it. And in that time and in that study in the logotherapy, not a single patient committed suicide on his watch. And that shows, again, some of the things that we're able to see inside of the church. The meaningful work, a lot of that could be working in the purpose that God has given you. One of my other mentors, he believes that our purpose can be defined in three things: know God, become who God created to be, do what God has called you to do. And in that, that's where things become meaningful. But the love you unconditionally is such an important part too. Again, another thing, the reason why the church exists is to be able to show and share God's truth in love. That both are important. And the same thing, to be able to surrender those things to God and let Him define the trauma of your past, so that you don't have to worry about it anymore. That is a thing that I don't think we focus on. Well, we probably do focus on it, but not enough inside of the church at times. So that we say, yes, God can actually free you from these things, so it no longer defines you. But there's a process to that, and we are able to work through that process as well.
Maybe I'm confused by that last point. What do you mean exactly by that?
Take whatever suffering you experience and find the positive in it.
No, you're saying the church not addressing the trauma, I believe that was how you said it.
So just like what you're saying with mental health, like people want to pray away mental health, which is it is something that can happen and does happen, but not relying on other means to be able to do so. It's the point in which there is a process, and that God takes us through a process to be able to work through things, whether it be our mental health, our physical health, or it could be certain things that we are tied to or have bondage to in some form or fashion. It's the sufferings that we're able to have, that we do have over time. Some of those things that are let go in a process. Sometimes I feel like we're too quick to go to an immediate answer because we want an instant gratification, and we honor the prayer, but we don't honor the processes that God may be introducing to someone. And again, I do believe that prayer works. I do believe that healing is possible. And I believe in faith healing 100%. But I also believe that God has created natural laws and people who are able to operate within those natural laws. And sometimes the form of healing comes through the people that He brings along the way. Otherwise, the church wouldn't exist in the way that it does to be able to help each other get out of the situations in which they are. So when it comes to mental health, I think that's a thing, just like what we talked about right at the beginning. Evangelicals often want to pray away an issue without actually tackling the issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how does, in your mind, how does the church change or start working towards addressing it better? Because in my opinion, it'd be like, I mean, I'm not exactly an expert on it, but it'd be more like having more group or discussion around it with more compassion, rather than just like oh, you're not praying hard enough, like less condemnation.
And again, I think nowadays it's harder to find someone to say you're not praying hard enough. I think that's a stigma and a lie that a lot of people want to believe or do believe now because of an existing issue that is no longer prevalent in the church. I don't think that the church has become a place in which they are ignoring mental health, or that they are ignoring these issues. The church, a lot of people equate the church to the hospital, and that's always been the case. I think what's happened is that we've on the outside looking in, those people that are looking for a hospital, that they don't know what that hospital looks like, or they go into a hospital assuming one thing and receiving something else.
And just to be clear, I don't want to say that like the church is this. It's just from the perspective of someone outside. This is what they do see on the internet, especially, is the church is this way. And so I'm more so just stating that as like a clarification. Like, let's address that real quick as well.
Okay. Well, then the easiest thing that I can say is that most of the things that happen, if you are on the outside looking in, those assumptions are just that, assumptions. I don't know of any pastor that would want you to stay in a place of depression, or would not walk with you through the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the anxiety that you may have right now. So the process is the key. The process is the investment that the church is able to promise alongside a Savior and Lord who gives us the ability to tackle those things. So again, it's hard to separate the spiritual side of things with the mental side of things. And I think you need to have a more holistic approach. It looks like one of my lights died. What a shame. but I think something that happens if you're on the outside looking in is to walk in believing lies and stigmas that just aren't true nowadays. That may have happened when there was an extreme on the pendulum,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we've balanced ourselves out a lot, especially when it comes to taking care of each other in the modern, what we call modern issues, which again are prevalent all throughout the Bible.
So how can the church address the obviously false stigma of how the church treats mental health versus like what everyone's viewpoint is on it? Is it just everyday Christians have to have this information in mind when addressing it in real life in everyday instances?
Um, I would say that if you are in a church or if you are part of a church and you don't believe that your church um, handles this well, then a conversation with pastoral staff would be the first step to make sure that the pastoral staff and you are in line with the vision and have ways to be able to handle things. First off, I would say that there are no lone wolves inside of the kingdom of God. Wrong things happen when someone acts alone on behalf of any cause, whether it is just or whether it is holy. Um, what I would also say in that is just the idea that there's an acknowledgement of mental health is important as part of your walk with Christ. To be able to say, "Hey, we get it, we understand. We have this support group that is able to help you in this process." And some of that depression, again, can come from so many different ways and so many different approaches, so many different places. For example, if you are grieving from a loss of a loved one, then find a place where you can work through that grieving and work through it with other people. And one of the church that I know of, a church that I actually am part of, has an answer to those people that are grieving. If you're going through mental health issues, or if you're suffering with depression, find people who can lift you up in the church. And it's not the pastors that will be able to speak directly into your life on a day-to-day basis, but it is the church that you are in that you are able to find people that can help you with that. So if there's not already like a support group or a place where people can freely talk about it, I would say that would be step two. Step one would be talking to your pastoral staff and talking to the elders of your church to make sure that if there is something, you just haven't missed it.
And so, lastly, I guess we can, and of course, if you have other thoughts, anything else you want to share, of course, you can do that as well. But the last thing I kind of want to talk about is if, I guess, let's say an individual is in church, they kind of feel isolated in the church, not necessarily because of anything malicious, nothing maliciously why they feel isolated, but if they still feel isolated in the church, maybe that's just because they're not a demographic of that church, or probably the demographic would be the best way to describe it. If they're not the similar demographic to the main body of the church, do they at that point try to find another church, or how would they try to find that community to build support in a church like that?
Well, I will say that there's no such thing as a perfect church.
Of course
And I
not.
do think that's important. My studies with my master's and everything I'm doing is ecclesiology. I study the church. It's my favorite topic. And what I like to do is be able to look at the churches, modern day churches, and churches through every single generation to be able to see how they have tackled specific issues. For this, I would say that in every single church I've studied, it's been ran by humans who are not perfect, that they're trying to seek perfection. If they're Wesleyan, if they're Calvinist, then they'll get there eventually. Sorry, that was a bad joke. Sorry, theology nerds. That just couldn't help myself.
You're good. You're good. You're
The
good.
the big thing for me, I would say, is that when you find a place where you feel like you belong, you have found your home. And maybe that is exactly where you are, but there has been a disconnect in looking for something in one way. If you're looking for something in as one specific form, but it actually exists in another form in the church. For example, if you're looking for a way to be able to deal with the things that you're struggling with, either it be sin, or it would be, let's just say, like sinful choices that you're making that you're medicating with, or if it is something like your mental health and you're struggling with depression, then Celebrate Recovery is an option that you may not have considered, because Celebrate Recovery is known for a lot of like addiction freedom. But it's not just that. It is a community that supports each other to be able to push each other closer to Christ and let go of the things that are holding them back. So if something like Celebrate Recovery is there and you're looking for something that looks different, if you're looking this way, but the answer is this way, sometimes it's just good to be able to look around at the whole church to see if there's an option. Now, I also think that if you do not feel safe or do not feel comfortable fully within the church that you're in, then there is nothing wrong with exploring the rest of the body of Christ. Like, each part of the body is different. I would say, and the warning that I'm giving in this is not just to go from church to church to church, because there would be a habit and that can form in which you will always be on the outside looking in. And the moment that people become vulnerable with you, or you have an opportunity to be vulnerable with others, the security is being on that outside looking in, or it feels that way. So the less involved you are with a church, I say, the less you will be able to work through some of the issues that you may be having through your faith. So find a place that you would be able to find family that you'd be able to be a part of, and that you feel at home with. And if you're not there, yeah, go ahead and look around. But it's important to look around with the intention of finding a home, not an Airbnb, right?
Yeah.
That's the differences, I would say.
So I only got two things to go from there. One, Christians who are in the church, not on the outside. How do you spot those individuals who are at your church but don't feel like they're in your church? And then secondly, is it necessarily a pride thing for the people who are outside the church, who want to be in the church? That's just their own pride is stopping them, usually personal issues stopping them, or is it something else? I would assume it's more, it's not malicious reason. It's usually ignorance reasons why people aren't in the church, but I want to put that to you first.
No. I do think that most of it is a security issue more than anything else. We want to be able to find security where we are. We want to be at a place where we can be vulnerable, but that does take that takes a leap of faith, right? Pardon the pun, since we're talking about faith ourselves. But for those people that are on the outside, that have difficulty getting into the church, sometimes it is asking yourself, why? Why am I having this issue? Why am I having trouble being vulnerable with any of the issues that I have right now? And it could be that you just don't feel safe with divulging that to just everyone. And I totally get that. I really do. That's the reason why small groups and accountability groups are so important, where you're able to be with people that you can trust and share your life with no judgment or no condemnation. But that takes a leap of faith. It really does. But I don't think it's a pride thing. Those people that are there in the church that are on the outside, let's just say it is a guest who's coming in to be critical of the church, it's good that they're there anyway, because if nothing else, they're able to see the body of Christ operate in a way that they're able to glorify God and be there together as one body, as it's supposed to be. So if somebody who is a chronic church shopper or whatever, it's fine. Eventually God will say something to those people, or God will say something to you and say, hey, this is a place where you might belong. You probably need to go a little bit further. And then at that point, it's your choice. And if you are inside the church and you are looking from the inside looking out, and there's people who come in and you can see that they have a struggle, it's our job as the church to be there as representation of Christ, as a representative of Christ, an ambassador of Christ. It's our job to be able to say, hey, these are like this person right here. I need to come to this person and be a vessel of honor to represent Christ to this person, because they need it in this time. So I would say prayerfully keep your eyes and your heart open if you're looking for people or if you haven't found somebody, or if you feel like that you've missed the mark, or you've been blind up to this point and you've been inside of the church, pray diligently that God opens your eyes for you to be able to see those people who are in need, that are sitting there inside the pews or the chairs with you in that auditorium or worship center that you just haven't seen at this point. And sometimes it's incredibly uncomfortable to do so, but in that discomfort as the body of Christ, as we go and be more vulnerable, that's when we get to see God do amazing things. That's when we truly see ourselves as part of the body of Christ, but also to see the image of God in each other when we become more vulnerable and let God work in through those things, as we are forming closer and closer as the bride of Christ.
I love that. Love all that. Before we move on to the final address of the last question, is there anything you want to go back to before we move to the final address?
Let's see. I've got a lot of notes. Unfortunately, I think I sent you like 5 pages of notes that
we did jump around on them.
And that's totally the point, is a conversation. I'm not here to preach a message, like I told you previously. A couple of things I would want to say. If you feel like you're suffering from mental illness, if you are suffering from depression, or if you are suffering from anxiety, I want you to know that it's okay. It is not a sin to have a mental illness. It is not a sin to suffer. Not at all. In the 100%. Same way, it's not a sin to have a broken leg. And if we treat it like a sin, if you treat it like a sin, that's a source of shame. That is not what God has called you to. God has called you to freedom. And there's a whole message I could preach in that, but this is not a message, right? So this is what I would say what to do if you feel like you're struggling with these things. First thing, be honest with yourself. Be honest with where you are in your life. And if you are a follower of Christ, or even if you're not, ask God to help you see yourself without bias and see where you need help. Recognize that suffering will come, that this is a process, and that even when you begin working on these things, it does not mean those things immediately go away. In fact, sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. Oswald Chambers says, suffering is the heritage of the bad, of the penitent, of the Son of God. Each one ends in the cross. The bad thief is crucified. The penitent thief is crucified. The Son of God is crucified. By these signs, we know the widespread heritage of suffering. It's going to happen. As we've said with our stats earlier, it's okay. And recognize it's okay to get help. The church is there for you. Counselors, doctors, therapists are there for you. It's okay to take medication on this if there's a chemical imbalance. Your circle of friends is there for you. Recognize that it's a process. And what I would say, especially with what we've seen in the Bible and what we've seen with the studies that we've talked about so far, is to change your environment. If you are isolated, find a way to escape from isolation. It's not how we were created. We were created for community. And the more that we can share each other's burdens, the closer we can get to who we were meant to be in Christ. Critically analyze the influences over you. Make sure that you're in a place that can lift you up. I would say instill spiritual disciplines, cut off all electronics for like an hour and just sit there in silence and solitude. Again, not isolation, but silence and solitude, which means that you have the opportunity to hear from God and know their voice. And then I would definitely say surrender it to God, even though that sounds easier said than done. It's something that we're able to see all throughout the Bible, that as they've surrendered these issues or these weaknesses, then that's when we see God's strength. In fact, in 2 Corinthians 12, like Paul talks about this thorn in his flesh that God just won't take away. But in Paul's weakness, he is strong because of Christ. So when the more that you surrender it to God, the more that you'll be able to see strength that's not by your power, by the power of an amazing creator. And if you are also on the outside looking in, or not on the outside, if you're in the church and you recognize that this is something you have not paid attention to, just like what we discovered earlier, I would say definitely find a way to be there for others. Alice Youngblood says this: if your personal circle helps form your perceptions of mental health, it's worth measuring its diameter. Reframing ideas about mental illness and even taking part in counseling may require an outside the comfort zone vulnerability. What do we stand to miss when these conversations occur in an echo chamber? How many people who desperately needed counseling haven't sought it out because no one in their circle recommended it? The well-being of any individual or community is an exchange, a holy balance of listening up and speaking out. And that's what I've got. Sorry, that was my small little list of things that you can do. And I say small, but again, I'm a pastor.
No, that's important stuff.
So those are important. I wanted to make sure that those were said before we were able to end for today.
So just to make sure we simply put that, be a good friend in the church and look for new friends to be friendly to.
Yeah, we can definitely say that.
That's extremely crunched and simplified, but sometimes people need something very simple as well. The last thing I want to do before we end this is readdress the main question of tonight and we can answer it simply. Does Jesus care about mental health? And if so, why don't we?
All right. So you're asking me that question. Okay. Yes, Jesus cares about mental health. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the Bible in so many different ways. Yes, God cares about your mental health. And yes, the church cares about mental health. It's about our approach and the way that we can acknowledge it in our culture, that I was able to show the culture the answers that Jesus is able to provide.
So you heard that answer. Now, when someone tells you otherwise, out in regular everyday information or in a random Facebook argument, you know the right answer to say right there.
And I expect everyone who's watching this to memorize that so they can tell others.
Exactly.
There will be a pop quiz later on.
Schmitty, don't go anywhere. I do appreciate you coming out and hanging out with me.
No problem, boss. Thank you again for inviting me.
Wanted to thank Schmitty again for coming on the podcast. It was really great talking with him about mental health and the church's attitude towards mental health. I think it's a lot more brighter when it comes to mental health in the church than people like to realize. So I'm glad we got to have this conversation. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, whether that be on Apple or Spotify or even on YouTube, and leave a review of the podcast. Really helps out a whole bunch. I appreciate everyone who stuck around and listened to this whole thing, and I hope you got something out of this conversation. Again, thank you all so much.